Well, we're talking about dating tonight. And the modern dating scene is a mess. For proof, we need only reference our pop songs, the soundtrack of our day, to know that our system isn't working. It's interesting, the New York Times recently reported on a study that they conducted a computer analysis of 3 decades of hit songs, and they found a statistically significant trend towards narcissism and hostility in popular music. The increase of the words I and me associated with anger-related words, with a corresponding decline in we, in us, and positive emotions. That's the world we're in today. Our love songs are getting angrier. That there has been a movement, right? And it's a long journey from, I wanna hold your hand, I wanna hold your hand, all the way to, ever since I left the city, you got a reputation for yourself now, right? There's a lot of pain in that, right? A lot of hurt in that statement, and there's a lot of hurt in dating. A lot of us have felt the sting of it, right? That we tried to get close to someone and it went poorly, and most of us can't monetize heartbreak the way Adele or Taylor Swift can. But we can certainly resonate with what they sing. And we certainly know the hurts that they've experienced, right? And I'll tell you, and I've said it before, but in my experience with counseling and ministering and living among people, you guys, for years, nobody cries like the brokenhearted cry. Nobody. Even funerals don't have that same level of sob of seeing something that still could be gone. There's a real pain in this dating scene. And so many of us see that and you go, you know what? Why would I even want to enter that? There's so much pain in this. It's so confusing. What's what? What am I supposed to do? And there's a lot of pain in it. Why would I want to go skipping through that minefield? Well, here's the reality tonight. Number one is that most of you want to be married. And some of the most recent statistics on millennials say 93 to 96% of you want to be married. So we want to get married. Even the people who say marriage is a dead institution want to get married. Isn't that amazing? Surveys say, is marriage dead? Yes. Would you like to get married? Absolutely, right? And you hear it when you talk to people, you're like, I don't want to get married. No. I don't want all that pressure. I just want someone who will love me for who I am, all right? And care about me and be there for me and not run out when times get hard, but will be there for me through thick and thin and love me just who I am. You're like, okay, so you want someone who will be there, just stick with you for better, for worse. Yeah. For richer, for poor, yeah. In sickness and in health, yeah. Oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah. So call it something else, but we long for permanence. We long for someone to step in and promise us that they'll never run out. We all want that, right? And somewhere between the longing for marriage and the state of marriage, there is a process of evaluation, but this process is fraught with danger. And that's why we're doing this series, because I love you and we love you and we want to help you. And there's a lot to talk about in this. We're not going to cover it all in one night. So if you're like, I'm about to learn everything I need to know about dating, false. We have to do a whole series to unpack all this, but let me jump in to where we are now. Between singleness, a guy and a girl just doing stuff, and people being married, there exists a process of evaluation. It has always been this way. Now, different cultures have moved through this process of evaluation in different ways. In some cultures, this process has been arranged marriages. That assessing who the proper mate is was something that was kind of led by parents, but it was still an evaluating. In times gone by, it was courtship, where a young suitor would show up in the parlor and sit with mom and dad and with the girl and just kind of figure out if they were a good match, right? So there's different ways we've done it in different times, different cultures, and yet what's always the case is somewhere between singleness and marriage, there's a process of evaluation. Now, much of the confusion I see in your generation is when we start to call this process a status. Most of your confusion and pain and questions come when we fail to see it as a process, but see it as a status. We're not going to cover that tonight, but there's a lot there, so we'll come back next week. But here's the reality tonight. Anybody can get a date, and anybody can get married. You set your standards low enough, you can get it tonight, right? But a lot don't do it well. But to have a great dating experience and to have a great marriage, one you rejoice in and not regret, all of that is based on two factors: who you date and how you date. The who and the how. The person and the process. Because dating is a process of evaluation. What are you evaluating? A person. And you're evaluating to try to see, is this the right person for me to spend the rest of my life with? And so the natural questions become, what qualities should I be looking for? That's the who question. And then another question rises up where you go, well, then what's the best way to move through this process to arrive at the right person? What's the proper way to move through it? That's the how question. How do I get successfully to that right person? Those are the two big questions in the process of dating. Who and how. Tonight's about who, and next week's about how, right? Now, as soon as I say that, I know some of you might say, well, Ben, okay, you're telling us about this process called dating, but here's the thing. The Bible doesn't talk about dating. Dating's not in the Bible. So what are you going to say to us? Just give us advice from you? Right? No, the Bible does not talk about dating, but the Bible has much to say about evaluation. Look at Proverbs 25, verse 24. It says, it's better to live in the corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious or quarrelsome woman, right? That's not written for the married guy. It's not written for the guy that's already there like, no, you tell me why, God, that's not for him. That's written for you. That's while you're evaluating a certain girl. You go, okay, it's better to live on the corner of a roof than with a contentious woman. All right, and then you start looking at her and go, is she always upset? Right? Am I constantly having to ask, what's wrong? No, tell me what's wrong. No, I know something's bothering you. What is it, right? Does she always have beef with somebody? Then you be careful, son, right? You don't want to be in that house. Get out of there. And the book of Proverbs and much of the Bible has a lot to say about a good woman or a good wife, that she's more valuable than precious jewels, right? Ladies, later in Proverbs 25:28, it says, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. In ancient cities, the wall brought security and it brought peace. You dating a guy that's got a temper? Does he explode? Is he a bully? You don't want to live with that guy. Because if you bind yourself with him, he will not build up your house, he'll destroy it. You will live your days as a married woman without peace, and you will not feel safe. You will walk on eggshells. There'll be a fragility if you marry an angry man. So the Bible's filled with helpful information about the process of evaluation, about the who. And so tonight's about the who. And what I want to do is talk about some of our modern problems and look at the proper solution. And our modern problem, if I could give us one of our modern problems in this process of dating tonight, is that we tend to look for characteristics rather than character. We tend to focus on characteristics rather than character. And you say, what do you mean by characteristics? Well, I mean, we look at features or qualities of a person. And those aren't bad things to notice, but they're bad foundations. It was like me yesterday. I was trying to fix something in the house, and so while I was trying to fix it, I stood up on our piano bench, and it shattered. I mean, splintered wood everywhere, right? And as I looked at that, I'm like, was that because that was a defective bench? No, it was actually a good piano bench. The problem was I was trying to use it for something it wasn't designed to do. It wasn't built to handle the weight or the strain of what I was putting on it. And for many of us, we want to put the weight or the strain of marriage on some characteristics that aren't meant to handle that kind of weight. And you go, well, Ben, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Well, here's what I mean. Ask somebody what they're looking for in a girl or in a guy. And what's going to come out? Features, things about them. Try it. Think about the last conversation you had with a girl. What kind of guy are you looking for? I don't know. I want him to be tall, but not too tall. Just like taller than me, right? And I want him to be strong, but not like bulky. It's kind of like a lean, strong. Like, I want you to see the muscles. Oh, but he's got to have abs, okay? He definitely has to have abs. But I don't want him to be in the gym all the time. I want it to be natural, right? And I want him to have a jawline, like not gaunt, but a jaw, like Ryan Gosling. I want him to look like Ryan Gosling, right? But I also want him to be funny. I want him to make me laugh, but not like funny all the time. Like I want him to be able to be serious. I want him to be like Ryan Reynolds funny, but like not like dirty Ryan Reynolds, but like fun Ryan Reynolds, that kind of thing. So I don't want him, I want him to look good, but I don't want him to be like super into his looks. I want him to be like Zac Efron built, but not like Zac Efron into himself. You know what I'm talking about? Like I'm kind of looking for that, right? And I don't know. And I want him to have some money. Like I don't need him to be like Mark Zuckerberg rich. I just need him to buy the things that I want. So like maybe like Goldman Sachs rich, that kind of thing, right? And on we go to describe what a guy's like, right? And we sort of assemble all these pieces to a fantasy person. And guys do it too. Guys, our modern age, you look at an endless display of images of women. And even though you don't say it out loud to your friends, you start to assemble in your mind what you want. Well, I want her to have a chest like Kim Kardashian, but a rear like a gymnast. Good luck in finding that one, right? You start to create a fantasy woman in your mind. And we start to try to assemble the fantasy person like we're assembling a sandwich at Subway, right? Like, oh no, less of that. Oh, I want him to have a lot of that. And I want him to, and we start assembling the fantasy person we love, right? But that sets us up for so much disappointment and so much discouragement. There's some real problems with that. Why? Number one is that when you create an epic fantasy person, no actual human being can measure up to that. Nobody can. Not even the people that you started comparing them to. And we all know that modern celebrities, there's so much work that's done. But I just pulled up one picture. This is one of Lady Gaga. I don't know how many of you are aiming at her as a goal in life, but there's an image of her. This was a picture of her while she was doing a photo shoot for Vogue. And then this is what it turned into by the time it hit the cover, right? And some of you look at that and you go, oh, okay, well, that was obviously worked on. But let me tell you something. That kind of thing happens all the time. That the women you look at in magazines, images on your Instagram or whatever websites you go to, and the men too, have all been chemically or surgically or digitally enhanced. And the more we gorge ourselves on images of human beings that have been digitally or chemically or surgically enhanced, the more we get disconnected from reality, right? And it's not fair to do to a guy, or not fair to do to a girl. The other problem when we start assembling in our mind the ideal person and start comparing other people to our ideal, the other problem is it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because it's built on a false assumption. And do you know what the false assumption is? That you actually know what you want. It's fascinating. Match.com. You can take Lady Gaga off, by the way. In 2008, Match.com, which is a dating website, hired a new chief of algorithms. And they hired him because they wanted to figure out why, as a dating site, they would have people enter in the features they want: height, weight, religion, education, that sort of stuff. And you would enter in your ideal characteristics, and they would pop out potential matches. And yet they wanted to understand why. As people typed in their ideal dates, the people that they were matched with rarely made it out of the first date. And they wanted to figure out why. Why is our algorithm not working? So they set this guy to work on it, and he dug into the data, and this is what he found. He said when he compared what people said they wanted, age, hair color, etc., to whom they actually dated, he says when you look at their habits, there is absolutely no correlation. And so studies were done by a number of people, and they concluded it is virtually impossible for any algorithm of you typing in features you want to put out the person you'll actually marry. Why? Because you don't know. We don't know. And I'll tell you, anecdotally for me, my roommates and I used to do that. I listened to all of them describe their ideal girl. And you know what? All of them got married to a woman who was nothing like that. Nothing like that. Why? Because they didn't know what they wanted, right? They didn't know. And most of us don't know, and you may find that hard to believe, but think about it. Most of us, when we ask you to describe your ideal person you marry, most of us describe an idealized version of ourselves. And you don't want to marry you. You want to marry someone who compliments you, not you. And so we don't know. And so it's interesting, with dating sites, they figured that out. This algorithm nonsense is a waste of time. And so most of them don't do it now. And the most popular one, like Tinder, which is by far the most popular one. There are 2 billion swipes a day on Tinder. They've done away with all that. Now it's just based on 2 things, looks and charm. Are you witty and are you hot? And I know most of you maybe don't use Tinder or anything like that. You'd be amazed how many young people do when you get out into Dallas and Houston and places like that. But in here, maybe you don't. But still, our dating system is set up. You go to a loud bar. Why? So I can't have like a full conversation with you, but I can see if you're hot, and your first line better be funny, right? And so we determine who we link up and start dating based on if they're witty and if they're hot, based on charm and based on beauty. But the problem is, Proverbs 31 says charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. It lacks substance. That we're basing the foundation of our marriage on things that do not last. Charm and looks don't last. They're not bad features, but they're a bad foundation. You don't want to pick a mate on their looks. It has no enduring quality. So ladies, this is Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop was a punk rock god in the 70s, sexual icon, right? And he's got a lot of the physical features that are kind of hot for guys right now. I mean, minus the haircut. Physically, he's kind of what girls are into now, right? But this is not what he looks like now. This is what Iggy Pop looks like now, right? And I want you to drink it in, ladies. Don't look away. Don't. This is your future. Look at it. Look at it. He's actually doing good for his age. All right, you can take it down now. I'm sorry to have to do that to you, but I'm trying to prove a point. If you date somebody based on looks, looks fade. And charm can fade. It can be deceitful, right? And here's the reality. You don't want to marry someone that marries you for that stuff. You don't want that, right? Because why? What happens if you damage your face? What happens if you get hurt? What happens if you get injured and can't exercise for a few years? What happens if you get cancer and all your hair falls out? Do you want someone who married you because you're so hot? Or do you want someone who had something more enduring to the relationship? You don't want this. And the problem with our world today is we've taken a consumer mentality and put it into our relationships with human beings, and we treat human beings like commodities. And so the proliferation of pornography or images online reduce people to commodities. That I don't want your heart, your soul, your mind, I just want your body, right? And we do that with some of the movies we watch and the images we look at. We start to reduce one another to a list of features or a commodity. And so we base relationships on whether or not that person works for me, whether or not those features are good for me, whether or not that will help me get where I want to be. And we become consumers of people. But people aren't meant to be treated like that. People aren't products. They're not. And you can't treat them that way. You're not an assembly of features. You're a person. And as someone interacts with you as a person, there may be features you have that they love. There may be some they didn't expect and don't know how they feel about, but as they get to know you, there will be things they love. There will be things that they can live with. That's true of all of us. But you'll marry a person, not a list of characteristics. And it's important that we get away from this consumer mentality because it's toxic. It's toxic. It doesn't help us. I read an interview recently with John Mayer where he was talking about the fact that he can look at 300 images of naked women before he gets out of bed in the morning. And he says, you think this hasn't affected my relationships? He said, I have found that I would rather go home and fantasize about experiences I've had than have a real relationship with an actual human being. Why go through the hassle of having to deal with the emotions of a human being? It's fascinating. I read an article recently by about David Levy. He's the CEO of a company that makes smart toys for children. And he wrote a book entitled, where's the title of it? Love and Sex with Robots. And he is the leading cutting edge of creating robots that interact as humans. And he prophesies about the future, that pretty soon robots will become as common to us as humans, and he suggests that marriage to a robot will be better than human relationships because it offers the upsides of normal marriage without the downsides of infidelity, illness, conflict, and complex differences. And the only question he asked was, if a robot makes me happy, why not? Shelley Turkle, a professor at MIT, spoke about this and talked about the disturbing reality that that's not real intimacy. And she had a grad student come up to her that said, I would trade my boyfriend for a sophisticated robot if it could give me caring behavior. And I know that most of you aren't saying, well, I just want a sweet robot. But the reality is there's a way we deal with each other where I just swipe through your images. I just evaluate the contours of your body so cavalierly. That's not the way we're meant to treat each other. As you walk into dating, you are not a consumer trying to pick which one works for me. You're meant to come in as a contributor, a community builder. That's why we started this series the way we did, that as single people, we're meant to pursue the glory of God in the good of people. I'm not meant to be a taker to use you to build up my life. I'm meant to be a giver to use my gifts to build up human beings for the glory of God. That's what I'm meant to be, a giver, not a taker. That as I come in, I'm not looking to consume, I'm looking to contribute, to build up. When Adam was in the garden, he was working, and God brought along Eve as a helper for him. And that's not a demeaning term. It meant that he was going about a work that was good, and God brought along someone who was like him, who could connect with him, that wasn't identical to him, but complemented him, so the two of them together could use their gifts to be a blessing to the world. That's what you want. He didn't bring someone to serve him. And some of us, when we think about the opposite sex, we want someone who just meets our needs, gives us what we want. We want a butler or a prostitute instead of an equal. And that's not right. And we need to repent. And the reality is God has brought us into an idea of connecting with people that we are not consumers of people, we're contributors. Adam's and Eve's coming together to use our gifts together to build up this world for the glory of God. That's the beautiful image. So with that said, you go, okay, Ben, you've told us what we're not supposed to look for. What are we supposed to look for? Well, I'm not saying external features aren't valuable. We'll get to that. But I want to say when you build a marriage, it needs to be on firmer stuff. And so what are the kind of things that have to be there? In our remaining time, let me give you 7 things to look for. 7 things to look for in the kind of person you'd want to date in order to be the kind of person you want to marry. The first thing I would say is they need to be a believer in Jesus Christ, a believer in Jesus Christ. Now, some of you may not be Christians and you're like, wait, what? Well, just hang on. We're speaking from a Christian perspective. There's stuff in here for you, but let me talk about this. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, you want to marry another believer in Jesus Christ, so you want to date a believer in Jesus Christ. You want to be aligned with them on the most important things in life. If Jesus Christ is your North Star, you want someone who's sailing towards that same star, right? Because who you think runs the universe will inform your values, which will shape your goals, which will determine where you go. And so it's an issue of allegiance and direction. So 2 Corinthians chapter 6 says, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? You go, what does that mean? Well, unequally yoked, that's language from Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. And back then it was talking about farming. Because a yoke was something you would put on animals. And you would put them on it as they were kind of working the fields. And what Deuteronomy was saying is, you don't want to yoke up an ox with a donkey. They're 2 different kind of animals. moving at two different kind of paces with two different kind of goals. So don't hitch them up. That doesn't make sense. Hitch up similar people. And so Paul imports that into the New Testament and says, you don't want to be yoked up, bound up where you go, I go, as a Christian with someone who's not a Christian. Now, is that saying that Christians shouldn't like the unbelievers and should get away from them? No. Christians and non-Christians should be friends. They should get along. They should have meals together. They should be coworkers. They can be roommates. But on the biggest issues of life, you want to be bound up with someone who has the same allegiance and the same direction. And let me tell you, if you're not a Christian, don't marry a Christian. They'll bore you to tears. They'll frustrate the heck out of you. You don't want it. And as a Christian, you don't want to marry someone who's a non-Christian because it's an issue of allegiance and direction. So why shouldn't a believer marry an unbeliever? Well, let me pull up some volunteers. Ooh, who gets to volunteer for dating talk? All right, come on up, kids. Paul used the idea of yoking together. I'm not going to put a yoke on these kids, but the idea is when you get married, you bind yourself together, right? That's what it is. I'm bound to you till death do us part, right? Now, let's say you're a Christian. We'll pick Macy. If you're a Christian, you're meant to live by faith. Faith in who? Jesus Christ. What does that mean? It means I believe what he says, and I want to do what he says, and I want to trust what he says, and I want to value what he values, and I want to go where he goes. And so I'm going to be pursuing Christ. If you're not a Christian, you're not doing any of that. And that doesn't mean you're a horrible human being and you're evil and you're just killing people, but it means your ultimate pursuits in life are not the glory of Christ in the universe. It's probably something along the lines of self-actualization and personal fulfillment. But as you begin to pursue those goals, maybe in dating y'all can get along as you sit at a baseball game. But as you start to make big decisions of where we spend our money and how we raise our kids, and you start to make those decisions, what's going to happen? One of two things. One is going to start to pull the other, and often what you see is a Christian who has to compromise and give up on their core tenets of their faith. Or you get the non-Christian who she's always trying to drag to church and trying to make do stuff that he doesn't want to do, right? And so what ends up happening? What ends up happening is they go their separate directions, and what happens? It puts strain on the relationship. And you see a tension there that ultimately they say is not worth it. And let me tell you something, when I worked full-time at a church, I saw this all the time. That guys would marry a girl because she was cute, because she was hot, she was funny, she was witty, and they just linked up and said, we'll figure out the rest later. And as they got deep into it, they realized they wanted very different things. Or a woman married a guy because he was polite and he looked good in them jeans, right? But when they got into the biggest issues of life, they were not linked up with one another. And what do they always say at divorce? Well, we just went our separate ways. Yeah, you did. Because your allegiances were different. So your directions were different. So if dating is preparation and a process to marriage, you get this right. You marry a believer if you're a believer. Amen? Thank you, guys. All right. Y'all want to give them a hand? Thank y'all for braving it. Right? But some people will say, well, Ben, she's technically not a Christian, but she's a monotheist. Does that count? Look, you're going to have differences in your marriage. You're going to have things you don't line up on. She likes Pilates, you like racquetball. Who cares, right? But on major course determining issues in life, like the nature of the deity, you don't want to ask the question, well, what's the least common denominator? You want to be lined up perfectly. I believe in God the Father, who sent God the Son to be a substitutionary atonement to pay for our sin so we can be forgiven and indwelled by his Holy Spirit, who processes us in holiness and empowers us to humble ourselves, to serve one another in love so we can be a picture of Christ in his church. You want that, right? You don't want to settle, okay? And ladies, I get so worried about some of you that get nervous about, will I ever meet a guy, so you're willing to compromise. And let me tell you something, I heard a pastor say it, and it's so true. He said, the loneliness of being single will not be assuaged by being lonely in a king-size bed, laying next to a guy who can't communicate with you about the biggest issues in life. And it's true. You don't want that. Don't settle. But not only do they have to be a believer in Christ, you want a pursuer of Christ. That's the second thing. A morally submitted believer, not just a believer in God, but a pursuer of God. Anybody can say they're a Christian. Hitler did. It doesn't matter to me one bit when someone says they're Christian. I had a friend when I was in college get sexually assaulted by a guy who had a Bible on his coffee table and a little Christian bumper sticker on the back of his truck, right? Saying you're a Christian means nothing to me. The fact that you met him at a church or at Breakaway means nothing to me. As one of my country friends said, you can put a bow tie on a turd, but it's still a turd. And I knew guys in college. I had friends in college. And I watched them dial up the religious language when they knew she was a religious girl to try to get her. And I would just shake my head to her like, don't do it, don't. And I remember looking at some of them, good guys, godly men in the organization we were in. And I remember when my sister got in college, I said, there is no way on earth she will date you because I don't see you striving to look like Christ. And so she's not safe with you. You want someone who's submitted to him. Ladies, Psalm 1 says, how blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, in which he meditates day and night. He'll be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. Its leaf doesn't wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. You want to be linked up with a guy like that says there are ways of thinking, ways of talking, ways of doing things. I will not do it. And if all the guys are joking like that, I won't. If all the boys were doing it, I won't because I have standards. But the words of God, I will meditate on them. That guy's going to flourish no matter what the seasons bring. You want to be linked up with that guy. And guys, you want a lady like Proverbs 31, that strength and dignity are her clothing. She smiles at the future. When she opens her mouth, there's wisdom there, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, doesn't eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband also praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. You want to live in a house with a woman like that, right? That you know is going to be a blessing to you and your house forever. You memorize Galatians 5 and you see it. Do I see in this person the fruits of the flesh, or do I see in them the fruits of the Spirit? Because this is what I want to live. And if you see sexual immorality in them, you be careful. 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is writing, he says, I write to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name brother if he's guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, a reviler, a drunkard, or swindler. Don't even eat with such a one. Which is fascinating because Paul was constantly moving towards the non-Christian, the non-believer, to associate with them, to eat with them, to love them. But he points out a category in 1 Corinthians 5. He says, if you have someone who claims to be a brother, yet when it comes to money or sex or their words, they're willing to violate the tenets of Christ, he says, you stay away from that person. That's the most dangerous kind of person. You get out of there. You don't want that. So is he pressuring you sexually? You don't want that guy. You don't want that guy. You want someone who has an anchor of love and morality outside of himself, tethered in eternity. That's what you want. And guys, you want that too. I remember when I was in high school, I heard a preacher speak. He was serving in Vietnam and he got hit by a phosphorus grenade that burns you and keeps burning, and it mangled his face. Half of his face drooped. And he said, I remember laying there in the hospital bed, and I had to lay there bandaged up with a guy bandaged next to me with similar injuries. And he said, I listened as his fiance came up next to him, and she started weeping and said, I can't bear the sight of you. I can't be with you. And she put the ring on the table and walked out. And he said he began to weep because he was terrified of what his woman would say when she saw his mangled face. And he said when she walked up, she looked down at his drooping lip and she matched her lip to it and kissed him and said, that'll work. You want a woman like that that's going to be with you for better or for worse because she has an anchor in something not fleeting like your looks, but a tether in the love of God. Ladies, you want a guy like that. Here's the reality. If you have a guy that's just into you because you're hot, ladies, let me tell you something. When you have a baby, there's going to be a season there where y'all can't get it on, right? It's called the long winter, right? And somewhere in that, you're gonna plump up, ladies. It's coming. And let me tell you something. You want a guy who was the master of his lusts when he had no other allegiance to do it other than his allegiance to Jesus Christ. You want to marry a guy like that. Why? Because when you're in that moment, you don't have to worry about where he's spending his nights when he goes on a business trip. You want a guy that has an anchor in eternity, right? That's what you want. Not someone who just names the name of Christian, but is pursuing it. Are they perfect? No, no human being is, but you want someone who's striving to be holy by the grace of God, right? When I met Donna, I was not impressed that she led worship. I was not impressed that she was on a stage playing a guitar in front of people, because there's enough secular or bad motivations to be on a stage in front of a crowd. So I didn't care one bit that she did that, but I watched her life. And what I saw was a woman that was pursuing being holy, not for applause, but because she loved Jesus. I saw a woman that was teaching other young women, not because she was getting paid, but because she wanted to. I saw a woman that was willing to serve. I saw the fruit of someone who was seeking the Lord. She was not perfect, neither was I, but she was pursuing him. And that's what I want. Someone you can run alongside as we pursue him together. And that's the third thing. You want someone who will keep the same pace as you. So you may even be in the world of Christians, but I've seen people do this where some guy wants to be a missionary to the Muslim world and lay down his life for Christ, and he dates a girl that just became a Christian a week ago. And she's like, so this is a Bible? Oh my God, I don't want to die, right? And he's trying to pull her along, and you're like, man, we don't want to do evangel dating where you try to date someone to Jesus, and you don't want to be the ministerial dating either. Well, he's a Christian, but he's a little raw, but if I just keep bringing him to church, you don't want to drag that guy. So even if he really is a Christian, if he's not running at the same pace as you, you don't want that, right? That person, when you enter life with them, they will either double your effectiveness or cut it in half. You want to run with someone who will double it, right? You want to run with someone that makes you play your best game. I remember for me, when I was in college, I used to love to play racquetball with my buddies, and we would go, and there was this group of girls that always wanted to go with us. And so my buddies and I, we would just kind of charge in and go after each other, and then I would play against one of the girls, and it was like, and they're like, oh my gosh, oh no. And I was like, oh yeah, sorry, okay. You gonna try it again? You ready? Okay. No, you hold it like you want to hit it with the racket part, not the side part. Okay, here we go. And it's kind of like, all right, whatever, you know. And then I remember one girl got in there and I was like, okay, are you ready? Because the ball's gonna come pretty fast, all right? And I hit it and she just went, and it didn't just make that popping sound, it made that whizzing sound, you know, when it like breaks the sound barrier, when it was like, and I didn't even see it until it was rolling down by me. And I remember I looked back at her and she went, sorry. And I was like, don't apologize, right? And we continued to play, and she would ace me, and I had to work, right? And let me tell you something, that's who I wanted to play against, right? Because she made me play my best game, right? That's who you want to be linked up with in life. Not someone that you're trying to constantly pull along, but someone that you have to run to keep up with because they're making you better, right? That's who you want. Now, those first three, we got to go fast. Sorry, we're going a little late tonight, but those first three are non-negotiables. You can't bend on those. Those are things that there is no wiggle room on. And let me tell you something. With those three things, we've eliminated a whole lot of people, all right? Currently, there's 7.4 billion people on the globe, right? Ladies, only 12.2% of them are males of marrying age, okay? So that means there are currently 906 million men of marrying age on the planet. 906 million that you have to choose from, right? If you take the three characteristics that we just applied there, Christian men are a third of them, that gets you down to 302 million, right? You get guys that are serious about it, that's probably half, that's 151 million. Okay, so we just took, in three little categories, 7.4 billion down to 151 million, all right? So we're crushing it, right? The ones just around the corner. Okay, so these next four, let me just mention them real quickly and then we'll get out of here. These next four, you're gonna bend on these. The question is, how much do you wanna bend? Number 4 is, are you theologically compatible? theologically compatible. And you go, what do you mean by that? Well, let's say you're both believers, both chasing Christ, but then you start to get into, okay, we're really serious about each other. We could build a life together. You start to have to ask, okay, are we Catholic or are we Protestant? There's going to be some issues there on how faith works, how grace operates, how authority works. Where are we going to go to church, right? You charismatic or you conservative, right? You can bend on a lot of things in these categories, but you're going to have to figure that out. You're going to have that conversation, right? And here's the reality that I would just push you in there. You want to agree on as much as possible. You don't want to ask what's the minimal question. You want to ask what are the big questions? How do you think the sovereignty of God works? How passionate are you about missions? Let's line up on the big things, yeah, but then let's start to talk about the small things too. And are we theologically compatible? Number 5 is, are we socially compatible? That doesn't mean are you identical. Jonathan Edwards, one of the greatest minds in America's ever produced, the great theologian Jonathan Edwards, married Sarah Edwards. They could not have been more different. She was a delight socially. Jonathan Edwards was painfully awkward. Right? But they both loved Jesus, and they brought out great elements from one another. And she wrote a beautiful book about, I think the title was Marriage to a Difficult Man, right? A biography was written about it called An Uncommon Union, right? They were very different, but those differences complemented each other because they were socially compatible. She could draw him out, and he could take her into greater depths theologically. There's a beauty to that. And so are you socially compatible, right? And that also means, are you headed in the same direction in life, right? And it gets down to country or city, right? I mean, how much do you want to flex? Some of you showed up in this town from Dallas or Houston, and this is a small town to you. You go, I am in the sticks, right? In College Station. Others of you, when you got here, you came driving over from Snook or Downbox or something like that, and this is the big city. You rolled in and you were like, they've got 2 movie theaters here. Can you believe that? And let me tell you something. City can marry country. There's no problem with that. But it's going to come down to where you're going to live, right? Where do you ultimately want to settle? Are you like, well, of course we'll live out among the cattle, or will that make her slowly die inside? You're going to have those conversations. There's going to be bending, but you're going to have to figure that out, right? And let me tell you something. We'll belabor this more next week, but with that socially compatible piece, let me just throw this out there. Sex is great. It's not gonna be what you do the majority of the time you're married, okay? It's great, you're gonna have a lot of fun, it's gonna be the best thing you do that day, right? But for the vast majority of the minutes you spend with that person, you're gonna be hanging out doing other stuff, right? And so a big question is, when you're dating someone, do I like hanging out with them? I see so many people that stay in a relationship. Why? Because she's so hot. Whenever we touch each other, it's like bug zappers going off. But then you watch them talk to each other and you go, he annoys her, she bothers him. They don't like hanging off. And when the allure of the sexual begins to wear off, they're gonna look up and say, I don't really like you. And that happens more often than you think. And that's why one of the dangers is injecting a bunch of sex in the dating process, because it frustrates the evaluation process of, is this a person I like hanging out with? Do I enjoy their company? When we go on a road trip, am I praying, please God, get me out of the car? Or do I not notice the time go by? Are you socially compatible? Number 6 is philosophically. Does one of them say, hey, I remember sitting with a buddy and he was like, you know what, Ben, every time I pray, I think that God wants me to use my gifts in architecture here in Texas to earn money to give it to missions. I talked to other friends that said, I'm going to Calcutta, right? And I'm going to go serve among the poor. And you've got to decide, as I start to minister to someone, where do they ultimately see their life going? Are we going in the same direction? And number 7 is physically. Are you physically attracted to them? That is important. There's value to that. And it's interesting, when the Bible talks about relationships, often it will mention that she's attractive, right? It's not bad. You want to be attracted to them physically. That's not a bad question to ask. It's just a bad question to ask first, right? Because the reality is, you might watch someone over time and see the depth of character, and realize they become more lovely in your eyes, right? And so you do need to be attracted physically, but that's 7 out of 7, right? Now there's more we can say, and praise God we got a series, and sorry we went so long tonight, but I got excited. But here's where I want to end. Some of you see this list and you go, man, Ben, I am far short of that. You describe some things that don't describe me at all. And let me tell you something, if that's you, that you look and go, I don't match that list, then you need to hit pause on pursuing dating. Because you need to go back and listen to the first 2 talks of this series. I got to get a relationship with God right before I'm ever going to get a relationship with a guy and a girl right. I want to get that right first. Right? And let me tell you something. For those of you who don't know, Christianity is not a list of characteristics, nor is it a list of character traits either. If you look at this and you fall way short, let me tell you something. All of us have. All of us have been devastated by sin. All of us have done things that we're not proud of. All of us have things about us that are really broken and sad because the world is not what it should be. The Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, said in 1 Timothy, he says, the saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of which I am the foremost. But I received mercy for this reason, that in me as the foremost, Jesus Christ might display his perfect patience as an example to those who were to believe in him for eternal life. What's Paul saying? He said, when I looked at my life apart from Christ, he says, when I saw it in the light of what I was meant to be, I saw I wasn't just a sinner. I was the foremost of sinners. I was a mess. But then Paul looks at them and says, but God had mercy on me. Not because I'm so spectacular. He said, but he made me a trophy that when you read my words, you would see, look at how low this guy was, and look at how the mercy of God lifted him up. Look at what a wretch this person was. He was the person killing people on the very streets of Damascus where killing is happening right now. He was ISIS. And God came and delivered him and made him someone who knew the mercy and forgiveness of God and became someone like God and became an author of the New Testament. So I don't care what you've done, what you've been a part of, what your hands have touched, your eyes have seen, where you have gone. All of us in here have been devastated by sin. All of us in here have no hope to be the kind of men or women we're supposed to be under God, except by the mercy of Jesus Christ, the one we sang about, who was the perfect man for us, the perfect human being for us, who died and who knew no sin, became sin for us and buried it in the dirt and rose from the dead, that whoever believes in him would not perish in their sin, but just as he rose, we rise into life, life with God forever. And when you put your faith in Jesus Christ, the very Spirit of God begins to work on you. You will not instantly become perfect, but now God is working to make you more like him as you pursue him. And you keep doing that. And so if you don't know him, that's our message. Jesus Christ did marry a lowly woman. Only his love could make us beautiful like that. And he did it. And so you get a relationship with him right. You pursue him. And as you're chasing him, by the grace of God, you will see someone running alongside you with the same allegiance, the same direction, the same passion, the same pace. And y'all just keep running next to each other and go, hey there. And you go racing on into eternity together. Amen?